Okay, so in this session, in a world where it's all too common for people to claim a right not to be offended, especially in their religious identities, how far can free speech go? Do we risk giving away too much when we respect feelings? More particularly, what is the role of cartoons as visual journalism? How does satire help us explore current events? What responsibilities does the cartoonist have when it comes to people taking offence? It's clear that in a civilised society, we need to be able to express our views without censorship. In this session, multi-award-winning cartoonist and writer Martin Rowson, who has been called the scourge of political establishment, will focus on the role of the offensive secular cartoonist. I'd like to welcome to the stage Martin Rowson.
Thank you very much, Sara, and actually thank you, everyone, for turning up in god-awful weather at a god-forsaken time of day, both of which adjectives are entirely appropriate for a Humanist Congress. As I say, I'm going to use extremely strong language. There will be unsettling images. That's my job. It is my job to be offensive. It is my job to be a licensed giver of the gift of offence. And I wanted to start off by giving you the context of how I work, what I do, how it works. And in order to do that, I need to, first of all, show you this image of Alistair Campbell. Now, for foreign delegates, Alistair Campbell was Tony Blair's Director of Communications. He was said in the early 2000s to be the second most powerful man in Britain, obviously after Rupert Murdoch. And I've got a picture of him up here because I had a really nice gig running in the early 2000s where I like getting out in the field. I like actually getting out and drawing from the life. Most of the time I sit at the drawing board at home, drawing politicians I've only ever seen on TV or in newspapers. But I like, as I said, drawing in the wild. And I had this very nice gig at a very famous restaurant in Soho in London called the Gay Hussar, which for the last 60 years has been the chosen haunt of the political and particularly left-wing political and also journalistic elite. The establishment go there to gossip and to conspire. During Harold Wilson's government in the 1960s, the entire cabinet would go there to have lunch, and the then manager would have great problems in where to seat them so they couldn't overhear each other plotting against each other. And it's also said that the serial fellationist, by which I mean he gave people a lot of blowjobs, and far-left Labour MP Tom Dryburgh had dinner there with Mick Jagger in the 60s, trying to persuade Mick Jagger to stand as a Labour MP, until he started fondling Mick's knee and the evening collapsed in confusion. Anyway, I was leaving this restaurant at about midnight one night, and I said to the current manager, John Robel, I'd really like to draw your celebrity patrons. I'd really like to draw the people who come here to eat. And I want to do it as a record, and you can stick them all up on the wall, and I want to do it in a particular way. I will do it in exchange for food. I will draw them in the space of about 3/4 of an hour, and then you can stick them on the wall. And I don't want to be paid, because I want to be a nice bohemian feel to this. So, you know, I will sit in the corner, wheezing consumptively, possibly drinking some absinthe. The only absinthe I saw was actually being drunk with champagne by two senior union officials, Jack Jones and Rodney Bickerstaff, on May Day in 2002, were drinking champagne and absinthe. Nice. And I would draw these people. And I also wanted to do it to capture these people, like a sort of fly-on-the-wall documentarian, or in this case, a fly-in-your-soup documentarian. As they ate their lunch, I would capture them. I'd also do it like Cartier-Bresson, the French photographer, who took one exposure. I would do no sketches beforehand, I'd just draw what I see. And this is what I duly did. And so, Michael Foot, Glenda Jackson, Will Self, David Blunkett. Some people, occasionally, I thought the pen would leap out of my hand and drive itself through my eyeball as I drew Michael Portillo and Michael Howard shortly before he'd been the leader of the Conservative Party. And I drew all these people, and it's there. You can go to the Gay Hussar and you can see all these pictures up on the wall. And then we finally got Campbell. And Campbell suddenly taught me something about the nature of my craft, which I hadn't previously understood, because as I was drawing him, it was very weird. All the other people I'd drawn had got on with their lunches. Now, the Gay Hussar is a very small restaurant. The restaurant is probably about the length of this room and half its width. So it's very small, very intimate. He was sitting on one side, I was sitting on the other side, and I drew him on the 21st of May 2002, my daughter's birthday. And it was a very hot day and the restaurant was very crowded, but you could have kept a side of beef in there for about 3 months because the atmosphere was so chilly. Unlike all my other subjects or victims, Campbell, rather than getting on with his lunch, was glowering at me with sort of fury and hatred. And at one point he actually shouted across the restaurant, "You won't be able to stop yourself from making me look like a really bad person." "Alistair," I replied, "I draw what I see." But in drawing him, I suddenly understood, as I said, something about the nature of my craft. Now, it's almost like voodoo. It's almost like doing damage at a distance with a sharp object, in this case a pen. But it's actually about a deep, dark magic. It's shamanism, if you like. Because what I was doing was I was taking his image, the way he presents himself to the rest of the world, without any control over it unless he engages in expensive cosmetic surgery. And I was filtering it through my own mind. I was filtering it through my mind, and I was shape-shifting him. And I was exaggerating certain parts of him through caricature, but I was actually taking control of him. The old cliche about so-called primitive peoples who think that if they have their photograph taken, their souls are stolen. I was taking possession of him. And Alistair Campbell is by definition a control freak. And he hated it. He hated the fact that I was taking control of him. He was hating the dark magic, the voodoo. And he proved this to me when I took it over to him for him to sign as a true record of him during the course of his lunchtime. And he dissed me. He clawed his soul back. Now, we know he doesn't have a soul. But he said to me, "This is a good picture of Jeremy Paxman, who's a British TV journalist. Where the fuck is me?" So this doesn't look like me. This doesn't look like me. This is not this is not a true representation of me, therefore I've got my soul back. You have not taken control of me. And that's what I do. That's what cartoonists do. That's what the whole of art is about, actually. Art is about the way we as a species have this amazing capacity to see the world around us and to actually filter it through our own consciousness, bring it out on the end of our arms, onto a piece of paper or a cave wall, or wherever you choose to draw it. Or to retell it, to recreate reality in order to take control of it. That's why I think we have language, actually, so we can tell stories about our lives and control our lives in that way. But it is actually the bedrock of cartooning, of caricature, is this process of caricaturing people and taking possession of them, because then you set them up in a narrative of your own choosing. So having taken him, I then turn him into a marionette, into a puppet, who I can set in a narrative. Here he is spinning a Tony Blair plate, being applauded by Rupert Murdoch. And here he is at the time of the Iraq, or in the aftermath of the Iraq War. For those who don't know, he was accused of sexing up a document justifying the Iraq War. And here he is, and it was said that Iraq could strike, with their non-existent weapons of mass destruction, they could strike British bases in Cyprus in 45 minutes. So here he is, "Hey baby, if I sex you up, will you come in 45 minutes? The thing about Alistair Campbell is that before he became a journalist and before he became the director of communications for Tony Blair, he was actually a genuine pornographer. He wrote for a softcore pornographic magazine called Forum in his pocket there, under the name of the Riviera Gigolo. This is the kind of person who is involved in British public life, which is very comforting for us all. Anyway, there he is. Sets you up, come in 45 minutes. And the thing is, you don't just shape-shift them to make them look a bit stupid, exaggerate their ears, etc. You can turn them through this shape-shifting, through this shamanism, and that's more or less what shamanism is about. It's about shape-shifting into absolutely anything you like. Now, this is about a story which you've probably all forgotten, or you may not have known in the first place. In 2002, when the current Queen's mother, the Queen Mother, died at the age of 102, a story broke that Campbell, as Blair's Director of Communications, was putting pressure on Black Rod, who is an official in the Palace of Westminster, who was organising the Queen Mother's funeral, to give Blair a bigger role in the Queen Mother's funeral. We don't know what it was going to be, whether he'd be snuggling beside her in the casket or carrying the spare wheel to the gun carriage. We don't know what he would do. But I suddenly remember this wonderful story put out by John Biffen, who was a Conservative cabinet minister, who was being briefed against by Thatcher's press secretary, Bernard Ingham. And he said the thing about Bernard Ingham, he was not the sewer, he was not the sewage, he was just the sewer. So the shit briefing against her fellow cabinet members was coming from Thatcher, and he was just the conduit. And so I suddenly remember this wonderful line, not, you know, the sewer, not the sewage. And there is Campbell transformed into, oops, oh God, I've turned it off. How do I do that? No, here we go, sorry, I was trying to use the, is there a pointer on this? How do I do that? No, no. Oh, God, help me. Here we go. Where's the pointer? Is there a pointer? No? Anyway, doesn't matter. I'll point it out with my hand. Hey, let's be primitive here. That you can transform him into a toilet. And here he is. Obviously, it looks like him. There he is. He's a toilet. He's a broken toilet. But that is recognisably him. And there's Black Rod sticking out of the toilet. And it goes further than that. The story was broken by a journalist called Peter Oborne, who was then the political editor of The Spectator, and there he is as a turd. And the man who tried to kill the story was then the chairman of the Labour Party, a man colloquially known as Fatty Big Ears, called Charles. He's called Fatty Big Ears because he was fat and had big ears, and he's Charles Clarke, and there he is as a tampon. Now, this is genuinely disgraceful stuff, published in The Guardian newspaper, a respectable family newspaper, described on the Today programme on Radio 4 as sulphurous. That was my job done. And I've tried to, I've shown this image in talks I've given around the world. I've shown it in India, I've shown it throughout Europe, and people have recoiled. So how on earth can you publish this in a newspaper of repute like The Guardian? And I then have to explain to them the context in which I work, and for which I'm eternally grateful. Because in this country, as I've had reinforced to me this weekend, we are unbelievably privileged. Considering the experiences of humanists from around the world and the level of oppression they receive, likewise, cartoonists in this country are immeasurably privileged. Because we are unique in having a over 300-year tradition of unmediated visual satire. Thanks to one of the more beautiful moments in world history. I don't know if any of you were in the session we had yesterday about journalism and the press, but the last few years when we've had this turmoil about Leveson, about the irresponsibility of the press, and you've had right-wing journalists who never move an inch to protect the interests of anybody else except themselves and their proprietors, have been talking about how we fought for free expression in this country. We fought for the free press. No, we didn't. We didn't fight for anything. Nobody fought for anything. What happened, as I said, it's a beautiful moment because it was an accident, because life is full of accidents. In 1695, after the Glorious Revolution of 1688, when, following the English Civil Wars, when 1/10 of the population of this country died as a consequence of people unable to agree on how they would choose to worship their view of God, the three warring groups agreed they would carry on hating each other, but they would no longer kill each other. That was a beautiful moment. Another beautiful moment was when somebody forgot to find time in the parliamentary timetable to renew the Royal Licensing Act, which was basically controlling the press. And so the act lapsed as an accident, as a mistake. And suddenly Pandora's box was opened. And things flew out of Pandora's box. And they spent 20 years trying to get this back on the statute book and failed because people thought, actually, we rather like this. We're not going to license the press anymore. We're going to let it run free. And they then introduced the Stamp Act to try and tax free expression. But as a consequence of this, whereas previously, since printing, you had had satirical images, you'd had violent cartoons, if you want to call them that, attacking certain people. They were almost always used as a weapon by one powerful man to attack another powerful man. Suddenly, you had people engaging in genuine satire where they were attacking the notion of power itself. So you have Jonathan Swift, who was a gun for hire, and then started attacking the entire political establishment in Gulliver's Travels. And you had Pope attacking the entire political establishment. And you had this man, William Hogarth, described as the grandfather of the political cartoon, one of my genuine heroes, who used his capacity for visual satire to canard, to attack an entire society. And this is his famous image of Gin Lane. And I'm showing you this for various reasons. It's important to recognize what this is. This is a very, very famous image, and it's an image by which people think they understand the 18th century. Because Hogarth gave us a visual representation of London in the 18th century, the greatest city the world had ever seen, with no flush toilets, where every morning the night soil man would come round with his cart to collect the contents of the chamber pots and then dump these wagon loads of shit in huge piles of shit on the outskirts of the city in Islington. No change there. Where most people would live in cellars, sleeping 20 people in a cellar, where they would wear clothes until they rotted off their backs. And yet, this was London in the first flowering of the Enlightenment, but it has running through it this open sewer of satire. And this particular image is a piece of polemical journalism. It was inspired by one of those things that happens increasingly often. No, actually, no, it's always happened. It's not increasingly often. Happens over and over again. There was a fear about the breakdown of society in the early 1750s because after the Jacobite rebellion of 1745-46, there were lots of discharged army soldiers who had no work. There was an economic downturn. It was said that you could stood a pretty good chance of being held up by a highwayman in Piccadilly at broad daylight. And, there was in fact a flight of the bourgeoisie and the aristocracy were leaving London for fear that they would be murdered in their beds. And they had this terrible fear of the underclass. And the underclass was seen as this sort of monstrous mob who were fueled by gin. Easily available, cheap, and worse than that, foreign gin. And Henry Fielding wrote a pamphlet pointing out that gin was responsible for the societal breakdown. And to accompany that, Hogarth produced this image, Gin Lane, showing the terrible perils of gin. But what's significant about this is its journalism. The original of this doesn't exist anymore. The original of this was a copper plate which he engraved, which almost certainly ended up being chopped up and used as shrapnel in the First World War, which is weird. It was created solely to be reproduced. It's not created to be hung on the wall of a rich man's house or in an art gallery, but to be reproduced. It's journalism. And it's the same as a tabloid headline talking about a hoodie murdering somebody, murdering an old age pensioner to get some money to buy some crack. That's what it's about. But what's significant about it is it's full of jokes. And again, I'm going to use the high technology of my finger to point out the jokes. So, to make his polemical point, to warn against the perils of gin, and this was produced on cheap paper, so it could be easily affordable, so it could be disseminated as widely as possible, it could be hung up on the walls of workshops where apprentices would look at it and see the dangers of gin. But it's full of gags, it's full of jokes. So, there's a dog fighting with a man over a bone, there's a carpenter hawking or pawning the tools of his trade in order to buy gin. There's gin being forced down the throats of babies and cripples. There's a baker in the background who's impaled his own child because he's so drunk. And the central image is a gag. It's a joke. It's a gag because it is a pastiche on the central piece of iconography of the Christian religion of the Madonna and child. But in this case, the Madonna is so pissed, she is dropping the child, the one hope of redemption, moreover, to his certain death down there. So he's going to die. No hope of redemption. There is no hope. There's a difference between a Hogarthian slum and a Dickensian slum. In Dickensian slums, there is a hope of redemption. In Hogarthian slums, no hope at all. It's all absolutely appalling, and so the only option left to you is to laugh. Because that's how we function as human beings. We have this wonderful capacity for laughter. We laugh at all the terrible things that life throws at us to stop us from going mad with existentialist horror at the fact we die, the fact we have people like David Cameron in charge of our lives, who sat his exams in this very building. This very building is where, year after year, young men and women come in evening dress to do exams so they can then fuck up the lives of people poorer than them. I think there's a kind of humour. And it sounds like this. A noise which will make any child under the age of 1 instinctively laugh because it's the noise the shit makes as it pours out of our bodies. And if we didn't laugh at it, we would go mad at the horror of it. And so we have this wonderful evolutionary survival tool. And this is what Hogarth was doing. And I have pastiched this image over and over again because it's a beautiful image. It sums up a notion about societal breakdown. So here is Cameron failing to do anything about pricing alcohol. And this is something I did recently, which is a palimpsest, which was about all-night drinking in London and hen parties. This is another image by Hogarth of the Rake's Progress, one of his first great successes. He did these things, he called them modern moral tales, where they were basically graphic novels. And a series of prints called a progress, ironically, about how people's lives would spiral out of control. So that he started off with the Harlot's Progress, how this poor woman came to London, became a prostitute, died of syphilis. And here is the rake who came to London, went mad, ended up in Bedlam, and there he is in Bedlam, staring mad. And I pastiche this, and there's a picture of Jimmy Savile in charge of Broadmoor. And Hogarth himself did what I did with Alistair Campbell. He did the voodoo. He did the bad magic. In this case, against John Wilkes, who was an 18th century radical journalist and politician who was put on trial for seditious libel for an edition of his magazine, The North Briton, in the 1760s, which had attacked the King's speech at the opening of Parliament, which the government, and it's called The North Briton because the government was dominated by Scots, the government said that he was actually libelling the King, although, of course, they had written the speech. And they put him on trial for seditious libel. They actually, one cabinet member challenged him to a duel in order to try and murder him, because he was considered so dangerous. And Hogarth, who had previously been a friend of his, friend of Wilkes, went to his trial and produced this extraordinary image of Wilkes as a piece of bad magic, a piece of voodoo, to demonize him, showing him as this demonic, leering figure with his legs splayed open, with the cap of liberty as a kind of chamber pot on this phallic staff. And this is where cartoons backfire, because this image, in a time before photography, was used by Wilkes's supporters to make Wilkes the most recognisable man in 18th century London. And Wilkes got his attack dogs to go after Hogarth, including, these were the days when you could employ a syphilitic, alcoholic, spoiled priest, poetaster, who was a man called Charles Churchill, who described Hogarth at Wilkes's trial. Virtue with due contempt saw Hogarth stand, his poisonous pencil in his palsied hand. That's how I spend most of my days, actually, doing this. So, anyway, moving on. And it was a companion piece to this image of Lord Lovat, who was one of the Jacobite leaders, here drawn by Hogarth, again as a piece of voodoo, as a piece of bad magic, on his way to his execution in the Tower of London in 1746. And Lovat was observed to smile as the axe fell on his neck, because one of the stands in the Tower of London collapsed, killing several of the spectators. Go out with a laugh, go out with a laugh. Anyway, after Hogarth, you then get to Gilray, who is called the father of the political cartoon. He takes all those ingredients I've described before, you take recognisable people, you transform them through the magic, or transforming magic of caricature, and you set them up as marionettes. And here he is with the plum pudding in danger, one of the most famous political cartoons ever, perfectly describing the geopolitical struggle between Pitt the Younger and Napoleon Bonaparte. And it's never been bettered. It's never been bettered. And the form has remained concreted in to carrying out its work like this. Here is Gilray again. But as I said, this is a period of the Enlightenment with its open sewer of shit running through it, satire. But of course, we are part of the political discourse, but we're the dirty part, we're the sort of unrespectable part, we're the people shouting insults from the sidelines. And the purpose of satire, I believe, is to just make a very simple point to people who think they're better than you, people who think they can put themselves in a position of authority over you, people who think they can deny you of your personal autonomy by imposing their will on you. They, like you and me, shit and they will die. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. The Pope, the Caliph, they all shit, they will all die. And therefore they have no right, they have no business seeking to impose their will on you or anybody else. And that's what satirists show. We show the shit. We tear aside the raiments of power and office to show the stinking, sweating, pissing, shitting person underneath. And here is Pitt the Younger, at the time he introduced paper money to pay for the Napoleonic Wars, as King Midas in reverse, turning gold into paper and shitting and vomiting money. And I pastiched this thus with Gordon Brown failing to shit money into the public sector in 1998. This was the 2005 election. This is Gordon Brown and Tony Blair and Michael Howard fighting over the scrap heap, the remnants of the British car industry. And that was based on this image, which is absolutely my favourite Gilray, because this brings home what I do and how I do it. It's journalism, it appears in newspapers. It is not, as I've been telling editors for 30 years, it's not illustrating your dumb, bloody editorial, which has been written by a retarded ape anyway. It is a marriage of text and image, because this appears to be a straightforward piece of jingoism, showing Jack Tar, the naval avatar of John Bull, biffing Bonaparte after the Battle of Copenhagen. Hooray, we've biffed the Frenchies again. But just look at what he calls it. He undermines his whole message, fighting for the dunghill. It's just a load of shit. It is just a load of shit. And there is Tony Blair at the 2001 Labour Party conference, just to show the intimate relationship between politicians and cartoonists. There he is, and that's my friend Steve Bell there, and that's me drawing Tony Blair. This was after 9/11, that obscene atrocity wrought by one dilettante playboy to try and impress another dilettante playboy, showing, as usual, a total contempt for the lives of passers-by in order to prove some obtuse point, and just killing 3,000 people whose remains billowed out over the streets of Lower Manhattan. But neither Osama bin Laden nor George Bush could actually work out why that's bad. And George Bush also couldn't work out why his God couldn't instruct him to follow one of the more important sayings of the man in whom that religion's name was founded: you should turn the other cheek. What if Blair and Bush had done nothing after 9/11 and said, this says more about you than it says about us, we're going to do nothing. You're an evil, bad murderer. We're going to do nothing, absolutely nothing. And we'll let the world judge you for what you are, being a murderous buffoon. Anyway, this was Blair at that conference, making what has been described as one of the first truly great pieces of oratory of the new millennium, described thus by Andrew Roberts, a right-wing historian. I watched him come on stage. I think I've interpolated since then that there was dry ice. I don't think there was dry ice, but there seemed to be dry ice. But he came on with the eyes of a 4-year-old child about to burst into tears. And then I heard him say, we must bring the values of New Labour to the refugee camps of the Gaza Strip and the hills of Afghanistan. And I thought, Jesus Christ, these people have got enough problems already without some wonk from Millbank handing out position papers on PFI hospitals to them, for Christ's sake. Anyway. This was the cartoon I did immediately afterwards of Andrew Marr. Andrew Marr, the evangelist, with the Prime Minister on the Mount of Olives, BBC News. And here we're just going to do some pictures of Tony. This is my own favourite cartoon of Tony Blair. I'm allowed to have my own favourite cartoon. This is at the time of the 97 election. This is based, for those of you who are foreign delegates, this is based on a famous British advertising campaign for toilet paper, where it features a Labrador puppy gambling around with toilet paper. And it's that New Labour manifesto, soft, strong, and surprisingly long. And the toilet paper traces back to Thatcher in an outside toilet at the back. And this has everything. It's got a toilet joke, it's got animals, it's got a good pun. So that was a happy day spent by me. Here he is as his master's voice. Here he is trying to get rid of Saddam Hussein, telling out his own guts. And here he is catching a George Galloway bone. Here he is as the peace envoy in the Middle East. And I'm sure you'll have noticed how much peace there is in the Middle East and what a good job he's doing. People are tripping over it in the street, banging their foreheads. Oh, more peace. Ow, I've got a bit of peace in my eye. And here he is as a sunset, a glorious sunset behind Gordon Brown, transformed into a sunset. This is Gordon Brown with that terrible smile Gordon Brown had, which should never be allowed within 500 yards of a child. And here is Tony Blair again. And I just wanted to say, how caricature works. Caricature is actually very interesting. It gets to the core of human perception. Because you can reduce Blair, you can reduce an awful lot of these people to very few significant tropes, as it were. So in Blair's case, it was mad eyes, ears, and teeth. His teeth were replaced by missiles. And this picks up on something which I call the Mickey Mouse Protocol. Walt Disney was a very, very wicked man, but also a very clever man. Because when he created Mickey Mouse, he created something which could be reduced to 3 black circles and be recognized everywhere. There it is. It's what Konrad Lorenz established when the Goslings broke out and they saw the wooden spoon and they would then follow it around. That we can, in our minds, we can reduce things down to a very, very few number of things and still make them recognizable. So there's Konrad Lorenz and there's Walt Disney recognizing this in the 1920s, and also this man recognizing this in the 1920s. Because before he came to power, Hitler was a huge fan of cartoons, disturbingly. And Der Stürmer was full of cartoons, as I will show you later on. But one of his henchmen actually asked him the question everybody had been dying to ask. Hey, boss, what's with the stupid Charlie Chaplin moustache? And he said, my moustache is very political. He understood what he was doing because he could actually be reduced to a black square and a black triangle and be instantly recognized anywhere and still be instantly recognizable. Now, one of his favorite cartoonists before he came to power was David Lowe, who was the third member of my trinity of great cartoonists along with Hogarth and Gilray, who canarded the Nazis from the very moment they came to power and was cited in a debate in the House of Commons during the war when Lowe was very left-wing, but a Tory MP said Lowe's cartoons are worth all the rest of the official propaganda put together because he shows the Nazis to be bloody fools, which they were. They were stupid bloody fools, having their stupid torchlit parades and their stupid uniforms. They were also terrifying monsters, but they were bloody fools first. And you need to laugh at these people. You need to laugh them back into the dustbin of history. But this cartoon is actually the most immediately effective cartoon of the last quarter century. By Nick Garland. It was a cover for The Spectator. There had been an interview with Nicholas Ridley, who was one of Thatcher's cabinet at the time of German reunification, and he had given this interview to Dominic Lawson, where he more or less said that Helmut Kohl is going to be as bad as Hitler. And they were wondering what to put on the cover, and Nick came up with this idea and did this cover. Had they not had this cover, Ridley probably wouldn't have been compelled to resign by 6 o'clock on the day The Spectator appeared that week. But because it was an image, because we consume images in different ways, the way we consume text, you swallow it whole, it goes straight to the reptile brain. The power of the image, it's that black triangle, that black square, had compelled Ridley to resign. This is Tony Blair's ear at the time of Iraq, with George Bush transformed into some earwax. Here's Tony Blair's tongue, welcoming the Chinese premiere. Here is Tony Blair's tongue at the time of the hanging of Saddam Hussein. Here's Tony Blair's tongue by inference. This is when they renamed French fries freedom fries in the canteens at Congress. Hell, Tony, was that a French kiss? Of course not, George. It was a liberty kiss. And here is Tony Blair's tongue about to lick George Bush's ass. When I filed this, the day I filed this, the acting commentator was a man called Stephen Moss, who rang me up and said, God, I've got a terrible hangover. This is making me feel ill. I mean, anything you can do about this? And because I'm the Albert Schweitzer of British cartooning, I said, of course, through the magic of Tipex, I managed to get rid of it, and we can now, I hope, have some animation. Look at that. Isn't that great? Anyway, this is, again, David Lowe. This is Himmler and the SS descending on Belgium, the SS descending on Belgium. And that's Tony Blair saying that the current state of Iraq has got nothing to do with him. And here he is as Nebuchadnezzar. And that's based on this painting by William Blake. And this is a famous dirty postcard by Donald McGill, because we often steal images. It's a shortcut way. People will know the image already, so you can make a political point by quoting the image. And this is Northern Rock. This is Francesco Goya's The Sleep of Reason Brings Forth Monsters. And this is David Cameron with The Chillax of Reason. And this is The Raft of the Medusa by Jericho. And this is the government as the Raft of the Medusa. And this is the Lib Dems, the Raft of the Medusa. Lord Reynard trying to get on after their disastrous performance in the local elections. And this is Botticelli's Venus. And this isn't. This is a British politician called Anne Widdecombe, recently appeared on Strictly Come Dancing. I'm showing you this. There is a weird intimate relationship. Because we've been around for over 300 years, we are part of the political discourse. We are part of the conversation. I've often described it as mind over matter. They pretend they don't mind, we pretend we matter. But it's very interesting. Politicians cannot, the one thing you cannot admit to in this country is having no sense of humour. It is the cardinal crime, because we think we have a great sense of humour, and nobody else does, but of course that's not true. Everybody else has a sense of humour. It's a constant human trait. But a few years ago, I had a very short gig on The Spectator magazine where I was drawing public figures who teeter between being national treasures and national jokes. And I interviewed Widdecombe. And actually, I disagree with Anne Widdecombe on absolutely everything, but I rather like her. I mean, she says what she means. And she said, you know, well, cartoons are such great fun, aren't they? And I said, no, Anne, they're not great fun. They're not great fun at all. They are assassination without the blood. We are genuinely trying to destroy you. It's a very transgressive process. I've been to cartoon festivals where my fellow cartoonists have drawn me, and somehow they failed to recognise the young Harrison Ford I see in the shaving mirror every morning. And it's very disturbing, it's very unpleasant. And she said, no, it's all just jolly good fun. And of course, you have to think that, because otherwise it would drive you mad that so many people hate you. But then again, they don't have to be in public life. They can actually go and run a pet shop or something like that and leave us alone. But it's interesting that what politicians do, they buy the originals, they buy the bad magic to diffuse it, and they always hang it in their toilets. You don't have to be much of a Freudian to work out what's going on there. Anyway, this is Mara, The Death of Mara by David, and this is a cartoon by David. Everybody does it. This is a cartoon by David. That is the British establishment, and that is the face of George III shitting bayonets over the people. The French are rather fond of doing this. This is another French cartoon of that's the face of Edward VII on the arse of Britannia. Again, this is sort of, it's taunting, it's scatological, it's dirty, it's meant to be offensive. This is a cartoon I did on the first anniversary of 9/11, which was Bush and Blair. Bush had gone to the United Nations, Blair had recalled Parliament. That's our asses covered, let's roll. There were complaints, I mean, this actually won the Political Cartoon of the Year award in 2002. There were complaints about it, not just from readers of The Guardian, but also from the editor of The Guardian, who said in the editorial conference the next day, oh dear, couldn't you have put some trousers on them? Because the sight of a human buttock, again, we get anthropological about this. We get anthropological because it's the way you taunt, it's the way primates taunt each other. They bare their buttocks in order to, taunt other primates. So that was more offensive. That was deemed to be more offensive than the fact that these two men were engaged, in my opinion, in a criminal conspiracy which led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people they had never met, which is apparently less important than seeing their spotty arses. And this is a cartoon I did at the time of the Olympics. This was a deliberate taunt. I'm sorry about this. This is a disgusting image. But the Olympic Committee had said, the International Olympic Committee had said that they would sue anybody who used the Olympic rings in an unauthorized way. And you were only allowed to take McDonald's hamburgers into Olympic venues. You weren't allowed to take Burger King hamburgers. So I just thought, this will be an interesting court case. Luckily, luckily they ignored me, as they probably should do. And again, you know, this is George Bush looking for his heritage. This is when Obama, before Obama's first inauguration of Bush and Cheney being, the shit of Bush and Cheney being hosed off the Stars and Stripes. That's a Tony Blair skid mark in the middle. Sorry, it's 10:15 on a Sunday morning, for Christ's sake. What's going on here? This was a cartoon I did about, and now we're getting into offence. We're really getting into offence. This is offensive stuff in some people's minds. This is a cartoon I did following the revelation that the Princess of Wales, as she then was a bulimic. And I did this for Time Out. And the person at the back is saying, of course, the worst part was persuading her to eat a bottle of champagne for lunch. And this appeared in Time Out, which is a magazine in London. And the following week, the letters page was filled with letters from people saying, Martin Rowson has drawn the most disgusting cartoon ever published. He should be publicly castrated for this. I have loved and cared for a bulimic for 20 years. This is disgraceful. This man should be fucking killed. It's just pen and ink on a piece of paper. The following week, they published a letter which I didn't send in myself, though I might have done, which said, I am a bulimic. I thought Martin Rowson's cartoon was very funny. I've stuck it on the front of my fridge. Which, if you think about that for a minute, that's actually... After Diana died, this again got me into a certain amount of trouble. You know, it's the Memorial Garden, danger landmines, it's to stop dog shitting on the flower beds. It's what she would have wanted. I thought that was quite funny. Not too many complaints about that. Again, you know, as I said, we laugh at death. This is one of the things we laugh at in order to control it. This is after the death of Princess Margaret. She was, try the purple princess, because she was very fond of fags and gin. And this was after the death of Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs was a very unpleasant man. I think everybody knows he was an extremely unpleasant man. When he became the chief executive of Apple, again, he cancelled all their charitable donations. Unlike the man who runs Microsoft, who has given most of his money away to charity and is deemed to be some kind of monster. But Steve Jobs was a monster, but a very clever monster, because he realised that we are such a dumb bunch of barely evolved marmosets. We have to mediate reality through his trinkets, which he sells to us for an enormous amount of money. So anyway, there he is. I thought this was quite a nice image of his coffin as an iPad. Below the line on the Guardian website, people sort of said, oh, for God's sake, he's not cold in the ground yet and you're doing this. And it's what they objected to was the person at the bottom bringing up the grief app. Until somebody posted a link to the official grief app, which was a flickering candle you could have on your iPad as you stood outside the Apple store going... Anyway, this cartoon I did after the death of John Paul II. I thought this was quite sweet. What do you mean, am I pro-life? There he is with the Grim Reaper. I thought this was quite sweet. And now we get into the real area of offence, because we get into the realm of religion. Oh yes, I got death threats for this. This one I did for New Humanist magazine, for an article about Mother's Day. I just thought it was quite a good gag. One of the editorial board of New Humanist resigned because of this cartoon, because I was jeopardising dialogue between and good relations between faith and non-faith groups. I thought that was my job, to jeopardise a relation. I still think it's a good gag. This one, again, I think brings it home, putting the fundament back into fundamentalism. I'm very fond of that one. This one, again, got me death threats. Look, the Bible says, suffer the little children, so we just made sure they did. And you haven't seen this image. Expunge it from your minds at once. You have not seen that. Which gets us to the big one. Actually, it gets us to the big one. And I'm going to spend some time talking about this because I think it's very important. Just have a glass of water first. You're all aware of what this is about. You're aware that this is about the Danish cartoons. Now, I had a weird response, probably what you might think is a counterintuitive response to the Danish cartoons. Because actually one of the reasons I'm a humanist, one of the reasons I'm an atheist is because I don't think people should be defined by their religion. I think people who think they are defined by their religion are mistaken. They should think about the fact that they're humans, not that they're Methodists or Seventh-day Adventists or Buddhists or whatever. So I think other things define them more than their religion, despite what they think. So in fact, my response to the publication by Jyllands-Posten of these cartoons was not what you might expect. Because Jyllands-Posten is a right-wing Danish newspaper that has been spending decades running campaigns attacking immigrants in Denmark. Poor, powerless people who actually empty the bins and clean the toilets in Jyllands-Posten's offices. And they used this story about this children's illustrator who wasn't allowed to illustrate a story about the Prophet Muhammad. They used it as another stick with which to beat this group of poor and powerless people. And I have a mantra running through my head constantly. I'm a satirist, I'm not a humorist. Humour is about attacking everybody or everything and using it in all sorts of different ways to reinforce your own identity. Satire is different. Satire is not just humour, it's a subset of humour. And it is defined in the way that H.L. Mencken defined journalism, which is about comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. In other words, I should never attack people for what they are, only what they think. That's fine, I'm going to attack religion, it's an opinion. Also, I should only attack people more powerful than me. Now, I'm a white, middle-aged, middle-class man working for an English language newspaper. There are very few people on the planet more powerful than me. But that's fine. So I'm going to roll these people in the shit because they're more powerful than me. They want to take away my autonomy. They want to impose their will on other people. I thought that Jyllands-Posten was wrong to publish those cartoons, as indeed did some of the cartoonists. One of the cartoons was of an Arab boy writing in Arabic on a blackboard. The editor of Jyllands-Posten is a racist rabble-rouser, or worse to that effect. Of course, the editor of Jyllands-Posten can't read Arabic, didn't know what it said. This person was still placed under a death threat by the idiots who responded in exactly the way you'd expect the idiots to respond, because 5 months later, powerful, politically ambitious Danish imams went hawking around the despotisms of the Middle East in Damascus and Saudi Arabia the images published in Jyllands-Posten and 3 more images which never appeared in Jyllands-Posten, one of which was of a Muslim at prayer being sodomized by a dog, a genuinely offensive image. What was its provenance? I suspect they probably commissioned it themselves, because what they were trying to do was to whip up a political frenzy. And they succeeded. So in countries where hitherto you had not had spontaneously generated riots, you had suddenly had spontaneous demonstrations about these cartoons. And this image, which I did for The Guardian, was the first cartoon I had drawn for The Guardian which had to be approved of by Alan Rusbridger himself, because the atmosphere was so poisonous, it was so terrifying about what was going on. I also worked for the Daily Mirror, and I was then illustrating a column by a man called Tony Parsons, who had written about the response to these cartoons of stupid young people walking through the streets of London with placards saying, behead the enemies of Islam, death to freedom of speech. And I'd done several cartoons illustrating his copy. And each time he said, no, it's too inflammatory. He could write it, I couldn't draw about it. Go for the second lead, go for the second story. And the second story was about a British TV programme called Celebrity Big Brother, and how there was a person on it in Celebrity Big Brother, a man called Pete Burns, who was a pop star, who was actually a sort of a slightly failed transsexual who has got collagen in his lips and it's all gone horribly wrong. And he looks terrible, and it's all sort of rather tragic, and this programme was a bit of a freak show. But anyway, I did a cartoon of him saying, I don't know about all these images of the Prophet Muhammad, I wish they'd stop publishing images of me. And my editor on the Mirror said, we can't possibly do this. You can't compare Pete Burns to the Prophet Muhammad. I said, well, why not? We've got 100,000 Muslim readers. And I said, think about this in a commercial way. They've got to buy the fucking paper before they burn it. Anyway, the end product of this ridiculous interlude over the Danish cartoons, where you had people saying, taking up extreme positions, one of which was, I should have the right to say whatever I like about whoever I want to, whenever I want to. We all know that isn't true. I could start saying things about any of you in this room just by looking at you, and I could start saying things and I wouldn't say it, because society would break down. You know, all these movies about people who are damned to tell the truth, and things break down. On the other hand, people say, the greatest right, greater than any other, trumps anything else, is my right never to be slightly upset. As a consequence of this preposterous furore, over 100 people died. Over 100 people died. None of them were cartoonists. None of them were Europeans. All of them were Muslims who were shot dead on the streets of Muslim countries by Muslim policemen or Muslim soldiers, and had been fomented into rioting by Muslim clerics who were seeking to increase their political power. Those are real dead people. It's not images. It's not drawings. It's not stupid scrawlings on a cave wall. It's real dead people. And I've always thought people who get offended never quite twig to the fact that the most offensive thing you can do to anybody else is kill them. Call them a cunt. It's not as offensive as killing them, believe me. However offensive you might find that word, but you know, there you go. And of course, all of this arose out of the historical events that led to 9/11. This was the cartoon I did for the Scotsman on the day of 9/11, and I said those 3,000 bystanders who were reduced to ashes and billowed out over the streets of lower Manhattan, where I stared at a blank sheet of paper for about 3 hours thinking, I don't know how the hell to cover this. And then I finally did this cartoon and I said, look, this cartoon says nothing and is meaningless. And said, yeah, that's the tone we're going for. But it was actually very interesting, the response by people to 9/11, which was the most visual event in human history. Without question, the most visual event in human history. On September the 12th, 2001, every British newspaper had at least 15 pages of photographs of those 3,000 people reduced to motes, billowing out over the streets of lower Manhattan. Real people's real bodies reduced to dust by these maniacs. And yet it was the cartoonists who got it in the neck. People complained about this cartoon because they saw it stand on the page of the Scotsman and thought, well, that's meant to be where the funny drawing goes. And so immediately assumed this was meant to be funny. That's not, humour is merely part of the armoury of the political cartoonist. And cartoonists were told to cover other subjects. Cartoonists were actually sacked. In America, some cartoonists got knocks on the door in the middle of the night from the feds under the meaning of the Patriot Act. And that's because this most visual of events, which was filmed and shown over and over again, the photographs were shown over and over again, they were captured by machines. This is produced by humans. This is, again, filtered through our own consciousness and put down on a piece of paper. Very, very interesting response. This was after a few days of thinking, I'm going to be like Wittgenstein, you know, that of which we cannot speak, we must remain silent, because that's 3,000 dead people. I had to deal with a political response. This was my response that appeared the following Monday, which I think was actually right. I think I got this one right. I think, you know, I completely stopped supporting any Western response when there were more dead Afghani passers-by than there had been dead people in New York. He should have turned the other cheek. He should have followed the teachings of the man in whose name his religion was founded. This was attacked by Peter Brooks, the cartoonist of the time, said it was the most callous cartoon he'd ever seen in his life. Previous week I'd done a picture of I'd been on the radio, and my friend and colleague Steve Bell on The Guardian had done a cartoon 2 days afterwards of George Bush as a monkey, saying we're going to attack abroad. And I said I thought this was inappropriate. It was too soon. There was 3,000 dead people after all. And he phoned me up and said, I heard you on the radio last night, you fucking arsehole. So I told the then pocket cartoonist on The Guardian, alas now dead, David Austin, I was being attacked by Steve Bell, who's famously got a big beard, and by Peter Brooks, who's got a big beard. And he said, well done. you've been attacked by the two great bearded cartoonists, Osama bin Bell and Osama bin Brooks. You're probably getting it right, you know. Anyway. But not just cartoonists attacking me. The Guardian started putting my work online soon after 9/11. The Guardian took off, really, in America after 9/11. Because unlike the American press, it was actually telling the truth. The American press was completely cowed by the Bush administration. They were terrified to talk about anything. So the Guardian suddenly was read by liberal Americans, of whom there are a huge number, actually, despite what we might think. And I started getting seriously deranged responses. It's a wonderful world we live in. We live in a wonderful world of instant communication, information superhighway. Back in the day, if people wanted to tell me to fuck off, they had to go to the trouble of getting an envelope, finding some green ink, buying a stamp, finding out my address and sending it to my home address or to my newspaper office. Now, they just have to sit in their bedrooms and type it and press send. This cartoon, which was after Bush got re-elected and reappointed Donald Rumsfeld, said, gee, Remy, even our top army guy says the Iraqis ain't ready for free and fair elections. Hell, Mr. President, if you've got the brass balls to reappoint me, then use your political capital and torture them till they vote. I got about 8,000 emails about this cartoon, one of which started off, and forgive the language, I've already used some of it anyway. When you finish scraping the maggots from your whore mother's cunt. This was about 3 or 4 weeks after my much beloved stepmother had died. And they went on to describe how I regularly raped my children after I finished raping Arab boys. And you think, why go to the trouble? What have I done which has offended you so much that you're prepared to send this piece of bilge, this piece of nonsense? I mean, you know, why? I mean, this is just light on a screen. That isn't real blood. That's actually Spectrum Red from Winsor & Newton gouache range. And of course I know why they feel like that, because it's voodoo, that's the point of it. It is meant to offend, it is used as a weapon. But the response is extraordinary, and it's not just limited to people saying that to me. This was one of the first cartoons I did, which appeared on the website at the time of the American election in 2004. And I got an awful lot of emails saying, you miserable, limey asshole. And all of them said the same thing. If it wasn't for us, you'd be speaking German. And after I got about 7,000 or 8,000 of these, I actually started replying to one or two of them, saying, yeah, actually, I know you know nothing about history. I know you live in, probably in the middle of America, and you probably don't have a passport. But just to inform you, America entered the Second World War after the Soviet Union. If you hadn't entered the Second World War, probably the Red Army would have swept through Europe, occupied Britain, I'd be speaking Russian, and you would have lost the Cold War in 1958. And they'd email back, fuck off, you miserable limey assholes. That was from the Republicans. This one I produced after Obama's first year in office, when he, for some reason or other, won the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm not quite sure why. But I thought it was quite, strange. There are a whole lot more people here this time last year. And of course, suddenly all the Democrats who'd been sending me fan mail when I was attacking Bush, attacking Cheney, said, this is a disgraceful image. And of course, this is racist. This is racist. Well, no, it's not racist, because actually, I don't know whether they've noticed, but he's black. And I haven't drawn him, I've drawn him looking like him. I haven't drawn him in a sort of stereotypical way for being black, I believe. But of course, that's how it works. You call the racist card, you call the Islamophobic card, you call the anti-Semitic card, and you say, actually, I'm going to use being offended as an offensive weapon, and here we come to the nub of the matter. And it's an absolutely brilliant gambit, because if you say, in response to what somebody else has said or drawn, I am offended, it means it stops. The conversation stops there, because the offender has transgressed the boundaries of decent human discourse. Therefore, you win. You win the conversation. Simple as that. That is why it is used over and over again. This extremely strong image I produced during Israel's disastrous incursion into southern Lebanon in 2006. And I got about 8,000 or 9,000 emails generated by the British journalist Melanie Phillips, publishing my email address on her website, Give This Man a Piece of Your Mind. Almost all of them said, fuck off, you anti-Semitic cunt. It's the anti-Semitic bit I objected to, because I'm not an anti-Semite. The other things may be true or not, I don't know. But it is a very effective tactic. It is a brilliant tactic. Not only does it say, you have offended me, you're not allowed to talk anymore. It also says, you are not allowed to criticize the state of Israel because you're only doing it because you're an anti-Semite. And anti-Semitism is defined as an irrational hatred of Jews. So you're mad. Basically, you're mad. We can do no wrong because anything that is a criticism of us is anti-Semitic, and it's irrational. It's a brilliant, brilliant tactic, but it actually stops working after a while. There are other tactics as well. The Israeli ambassador wrote a letter to The Guardian, which started off with a dictionary definition of a cartoon. Said, by these lights, Martin Rowson's cartoon is not a cartoon. Okay, so this is really clever magic. What you've done doesn't even exist. So you're an anti-Semite, so you're mad, you're not allowed to say anything, and what you do doesn't exist. I mean, as I said, this is deep, deep currents, weird shit going on. In the latest round of horror in the Middle East, this cartoon, which I thought was relatively even-handed, it was accused of being monstrously anti-Semitic because I had shown the Israeli soldier as a monstrous Goliath figure. Well, yes, yes. I mean, this one, after the downing of the Malayan plane, where the figure of death is offering the media over here the option of taking the plane, looking at the horror of the plane, or looking at the horror of Gaza. That was anti-Semitic because I was making implications about Israel connected with death in some I don't understand. This one about the what are they called? Bilderberg group meeting in Watford last year. Bless them. There they are, these figures walking over the rainbow into Valhalla of the elite. And apparently, I think that's actually almost a photograph of Henry Kissinger, who, as I think we all know, is probably a war criminal. No, he is a war criminal. He's responsible for the deaths of hundreds and thousands of people he never met. And yet, of course, why has he chosen, you know, again, Rowson doing the worst cartoon since the closure of Der Stürmer, he has drawn this Henry Kissinger as a Jew with blood on his hands. Well, actually, that's beside the point. He's a man with blood on his hands. The fact he's a Jew is irrelevant. And this one, during remember the Turkish boats that tried to get into Gaza in 2010. And I got into a wonderful spat with Adam Levick of CIF Watch, which is a website specifically dedicated to teasing out any hint of anti-Semitism in The Guardian, who said this was a deeply anti-Semitic cartoon. A deeply anti-Semitic cartoon because I had taken a Jewish myth and was using it to attack Israel. I joined in. I thought I'd sort of fight back to this one. I said, well, actually, you know, let's be strictly pedantic about this. Noah was pre-Abrahamic and therefore wasn't actually technically a Jew. This is nonsense. You clearly used biblical animals. Animals mentioned. Okay, biblical animals. Fine, great. Okay, let's look at this. Because I did this quite carefully. I think you'll find there's a walrus. Which bit of Leviticus is that in? Says you can't eat a walrus. There are ostriches. There's a pangolin in there. There's wallabies. There's an aardvark. And there is an okapi. First described to science in, Richard, is it 2001? So 1901 or 1903? I can't remember.
I didn't hear the name.
The okapi. When was it first described to science?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
Not
1903. So let's say 1903. And so I said, okay, so can you give me the biblical chapter and verse describing the okapi first described to science in 1903? I said, that is irrelevant. And I said, no, the elephant's behind it. Yeah, well, the unicorn. Well, I think there probably are unicorns in the Bible, you know. And this is another. This was Alan Yentob, who was a senior figure in the BBC, who became controller of BBC One in the early 90s when I used to work for the Independent magazine. I do a caricature for them every week. And I did a drawing of him. And he is a Syrian Jew. And he has got a very big nose. And I drew him with a TV in the end of his nose. I said, no, you can't do that. His nose is too big. So I said, OK, well, send me some photographs. I'll try and deal with this. And every time I drew him, I didn't even do a caricature. And it looked like the most appalling caricature of a Jew. So I finally drew him and submitted the cartoon. No, his nose is far too big. And I said, I think if you look carefully, you'll see he has no nose at all. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's fine then. The following week, they wanted me to do a cartoon of Frank Bruno, black British boxer. I said, yeah, do Frank Bruno, but don't make him look black. But of course, the reason why people do this is because cartoons have been used as the worst kind of voodoo, the worst kind of evil, offensive stuff. This is from Der Stürmer. But then again, sometimes people complain too much, but they use the being offended gambit. So this is Radovan Karadzic when he was an aromatherapist being taken off to the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague, and there's justice treading in some dog shit, spelling out the words Iraq. And somebody wrote a letter to The Guardian, which was published, which just said, Martin Rowson's cartoon is offensive. Yours sincerely. So I have justified myself by being offended. That people are actually defined by being offended. Everybody is offended all the time by everything. And as I've explained to you, it is merely a tactic to shut people up. That's all it is. So sooner or later, nobody will ever speak. Nobody will say anything. All discourse will stop, and we will just stumble mutely into extinction. And hooray for that. Because then we won't have to put up with people like David Cameron. And here he is, hello trees, hello clouds, being like Basil Fotherington Thomas from the Molesworth books. This is by the great Ronald Searle. And this is going to be interesting. Here he is trying to be like Flashman. This is an image which will sear itself on your minds. I apologize for this in advance. You will wake up on your deathbed thinking, ah! And that was George Osborne when he was quoted on the BBC website, I'm minded to get hard-nosed over Pfizer. So, but this is going to be interesting. This is going to be interesting. This is an image of Professor Dawkins. This is the first time this has happened. Actually, one of my victims has been in the audience. Which I did for the cover of New Humanist magazine, whom we've mentioned already. And this was to cover Richard and the late Christopher Hitchens, The New Atheism. And I'm showing this because I've had Serbs, I've had Catholics, I've had Republicans, I've had Democrats. I thought the response to this might actually tick the last box in my book of the offended. Because on your website, there was a lengthy dialogue which Caspar Melville, the editor of New Humanist, alerted me to, saying this was one of the most grossly homophobic images ever to be published. Because I was depicting Richard as a limp-wristed, stereotypical gay man. Well, in fact, I wasn't. His wrists were like that, not limp. But they said, yeah, it's the most grossly offensive, homophobic image. And then somebody, probably wasn't an American, joined in, saying, no, he's just being happy. That's what I was drawing. You're happy, like Fotherington Thomas, skipping around. And I said, no, he's obviously meant to be gay. No, he's just being happy. He's being jolly, that's all. He's being happy. And then somebody said, he is wearing sandals. This is clearly homophobic, as sandals are a well-known gay signifier. At which point you think, Jesus Christ. Well, actually, that's another picture. It's another picture I did of Richard, just to... I like that one. I think, didn't you object to that? No, you didn't object to that, okay. Anyway, I thought, I've got the atheists. I've offended the atheists. There is nowhere left for me to go. Until I did this one, where I introduced a new character, which is a shark. This is Wonga, the lone shark, who's a rather nice shark. And somebody objected repeatedly to my depiction of these harassed creatures of the deep, who are hundreds of thousands of whom are slain every year to feed the requirements of Chinese cuisine. And how dare I compare them to human beings? And I thought, actually, if a shark sees one of my cartoons and is offended by it, it can probably look after itself. But all the time, special interests, special pleading groups are saying, you've offended me, you've offended me, you've offended me. Recognize it for what it is. It is merely a political tactic. And in the meantime, they fail to be offended by the really important things. For example, at the beginning of 2010, you will remember there was an earthquake in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince in Haiti, in which 250,000 people died like that, the poorest people on the planet. More people than, I think, died in the Asian tsunami. The next day, the BBC News knocked that story of 250,000 poor, black, dead people off the top of the news agenda to cover the fact that bankers on Wall Street were complaining about the fact they might not get a bonus that year. I went to a talk at London Zoo in 2009 where somebody showed a bar chart showing all global expenditure. The highest item of global expenditure was Obama's stimulation. Second highest, arms trade, obviously. Third highest was bonuses. This is 2009, the year after the crash, which had been caused by the hubris, incompetence and greed of the banks. Third highest item of expenditure globally was bonuses just on Wall Street. Not in the City of London, not in Frankfurt, just on Wall Street, which was double the size of all global aid. Double the size. Now, that offends me. I am deeply offended by that. I'm deeply offended by these useless, hubristic maniacs who fuck up their own economic system through their own stupidity and incompetence and are driven by deranged avarice. I'm offended by that. I'm not offended by people who say you're a stinking atheist, you're a stupid Londoner, or whatever they choose to seek to offend me by calling me. There are real things which we as humanists need to address because of their monstrous injustice and their monstrous inhumanity. One of them is the way people use offence to defend their offensive religions. I am deeply offended by people being dumb enough to think that they should kill people who don't agree with them. And yet, are they all going to put their hands up and say, oh, I'm really sorry, Martin, I'm going to stop doing that? I'm offended by people who think that an imaginary life after they're dead is better than the life they should be living now. Are they all going to say, I'm terribly sorry, Martin, I'm just not going to believe in that? No, because we live in a babel of argument. We live in a constant dialectic flow of people rowing with each other. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us actually fun to be around, have a good argument. And yet. When a genuinely mad person tried to blow up his underpants on a plane over Chicago in Christmas 2009, I did this cartoon. Hey everyone, be honest, does my bomb look big in this? I actually wanted the leaders of the world to make a video to be posted on Al Jazeera to say to Osama bin Laden, look, you may think you've got a point, but can we do this seriously? You can't have exploding underpants. You can't do it like that. You're just cheapening the whole of the jihad. I mean, you know, it's take this seriously, for Christ's sake. People thought I'd be killed for this. People genuinely worried for my life. But people thought I would be killed because of this cartoon. I never thought I'd be killed. Anybody kills me with this cartoon, I mean, I die laughing at them, to be honest. But that's what you should do. You should laugh at them. You should laugh them back into the dustbin of history. You should laugh and laugh and laugh. And yet it's always been the same. They've always been offended. People have always been using religious pretexts for offence and to oppress other people. This is getting back to the great James Gilray. This was published in the 1790s, and it's about the Whig opposition. There's Charles James Fox and Sheridan visiting the Prince Regent and his infant daughter, the infant Princess Charlotte, and they're kissing the little baby's bottom. And Gilray got arrested for this cartoon on a charge of criminal blasphemy because of the caption, "The Wise Men's Offering." Interesting context here. There was at the time a very ambitious conservative Tory, he would have been then, statesman called George Canning, who eventually became Prime Minister in the 1820s, who recognised an important thing about my craft as then practised by James Gilray, which was that for Canning to be recognised as an important coming man, as somebody who was worth paying attention to, he had to appear in one of Gilray's satirical images. Because otherwise he was insufficiently important and unrecognisable. And he got his friends and agents to petition Gilray for months to put him in one of his cartoons. And Gilray, not unreasonably, said, sod off, leave me alone. To digress for a moment, I did a cartoon in the 1990s of then opposition European spokesman for the Labour Party, Dennis McShane, subsequently imprisoned for fiddling his expenses. But anyway, he's an old friend of mine. He had gone to a meeting of Labour Eurosceptics in a committee room in the House of Parliament and had heckled from the back. And this was the same day as it was reported that BSE had crossed the species barrier between between cows and sheep. So I did a cartoon of a sheep rearing up on its back legs, foaming at the mouth, and two sheep on a hill in the background. One of them saying, "Oh my God, has BSE crossed into sheep?" No, that's just Dennis McShane. He phoned me up at 7:30 the following morning saying, "I want the original." Yeah, fine, it's 300 quid. Okay, yeah, you must put me in lots more cartoons. And I said, "Dennis, I'm a cartoonist. I'm going to tell everybody I know about this conversation. I don't care, just put me in more cartoons." Anyway, Canning got Gilray off. He got him off the charge of criminal blasphemy, which was actually quite important in the 1790s. And so Gilray was in Canning's debt, and he started doing stuff for the Anti-Jacobin, which was Canning's anti-French revolutionary magazine, and he had to put him in one of his cartoons. And here is this wonderful image of London after a Jacobin invasion, after the French have invaded, where the streets are running with blood, where Charles James Fox is flogging Pitt the Younger at the flogging block. There are people being beheaded, people being defenestrated. And right at the back, hanging from a lamppost, is Canning. Gilray saying, "I may have to do this." Fuck you, actually. Fuck you. Which is probably what we should all say, all the time, about everything. But of course, it is the most offensive word imaginable. This was about two British comedians, Russell Brand and Jonathan Ross, who late night on Radio 2 used the word fuck. The Daily Mail then whipped it up into a major moral outrage without having, and so people who'd never heard the programme complained about it, because the worst thing that is imaginable is a little old lady listening to the radio late at night and hearing the word fuck, because everything else pales into comparison, unless, of course, you offend her religion, which is even worse. But actually offending her fucking religion is worst of all. And this, however, shows that actually it's quite a useful way. You know, if you drop a car battery on your foot, you don't go, "Ugh," you go, "fuck!" And this is how I said goodbye to Tony Blair. And I'm very grateful to The Guardian for publishing this, because it is the pen, the pun is mighty in the sword. So here he is. Hey, all you guys. Everyone, look at these great leaving presents. A fork earth for all of you, a fur cuff from Gordon, and fair coffin dye from the grateful people of Iraq, Afghanistan, all you guys. Fuck off, and die. It felt a lot better. I was very childish, I know, but I felt a lot better. Somebody sent me another email. Why do you have to be so unremittingly negative all the time? Oh, sod this. So I emailed back saying, why do you have to email total strangers to complain about things you don't even have to look at in the first place? Anyway, I think fair coffin dye is a pretty good gag. 15 minutes later, he replied, I've only just got it. That's brilliant, at which point I knew my work was done that day, as it is this morning. Thank you very much for listening. And I think we've got 10 minutes. We've got 10 minutes for questions if anybody wants to ask a question or just purge your souls.
Take that one there and then one over there. So, lady first. If you can talk loudly, because there's people in the back room that won't be able to hear you otherwise.
It's a little bit of a tangent, but given the gift of defence, you've done that wonderfully today. Thank you very much. Why is it that there's so few women cartoonists, and is it because they don't like offending? And I noticed just as a little article, when you quoted just a couple of minutes ago, it was a little old lady who would be offended by the fuck campaign.
Yeah, I apologise for that.
Don't apologise, but...
I'll check my privilege. My privilege is fine. How's yours? It's a good question. It's a good question. A few years ago, I was at a Guardian comment page Christmas do, and I was sitting with Steve Bell and David Austin and Andre Kreutzer, who's a Polish cartoonist, works at the Guardian. And the then letters editor, who was a woman, came and said, why are there not more women cartoonists? And we all said, I'm terribly sorry, we don't commission the cartoonists, you do. And there are lots of great women cartoonists. But for some reason, I mean, the thing is, there are very few people who do it, actually. There are about 15 political cartoonists in the country who make a living. And it is down to the commissioning editors. And also, you know, we are engaged in a sordid, squalid trade. And I know that there are some women cartoonists, a woman called Lou McKeever, who is very good and very, very vicious. She appears in the Morning Star, and I've tried to get her into the Guardian, and it's not my call. For some reason, they don't use it. I don't know why. I don't know why. But you know, you have to ask them. So, a bit of a cop-out of the answer there.
There's one over there. You can ask a question loud, please, so people can hear.
Can you suggest how does the writer of Jesus and Mo continue to get away with it?
By hiding, I think. I don't know. I mean, I think Jesus and Mo is funny. I mean, it's actually a nice gag. But it is indicative of both the institutionalized cowardice of academic institutions, actually, but also people just using this excuse to be offended. I'm sure if they could get away with it, train spotters would call for the death of people who laugh at train spotters. It is a tactic. But I think Jesus and Mo is brilliant. I can't see what the problem is. I mean, I did once do a cartoon strip which was going to be called Jesus Christ and His Crucifixion Capers, which would be just sort of cheap slapstick of him sort of getting, oh God, I've been nailed to the cross again. I did a cartoon which the New Statesman published about 25 years ago of, it was a pastiche of Grunwald's altarpiece, you know, that very gory German Gothic altarpiece, he's sort of up there like that, with he's got a cigarette in one hand. And John the Baptist saying, surely Lord, there's a simpler way to give up smoking. I was very pleased with that one. I don't think it would be published today, somehow or other.
Okay. Any more questions? Yeah. Oh, one at the back. So you said there was one at the back. Yeah. You? Did you have a question?
Yes.
Yes? Yep. You want to ask it?
Given that offence is actually just a matter of choice, should we even be discussing it?
Should we even be discussing it? Probably not, except the fact that it exists. You know, it is a thing which is happening. We should address it and we should recognise it for what it is, and then we should dismiss it, I think. But the easy option, I mean, it's like the death of the Pope, the death of the last Pope. If the last Pope had died 100 years ago, or I mean, if he died 200 years ago, there would have been bonfires up and down the breadth of this country of people celebrating the death of the Antichrist. When John Paul II died, the BBC gave it blanket coverage, despite the fact that the Pope is of no consequence to most of the people in this country, and John Paul II was actually rather a wicked old man. But I think they did it because they thought, oh, well, we better do this in case somebody's offended because we haven't done it. Because they're bending over backwards to second guess where the offence will come from. I almost got very, very briefly, I almost got Radio 1 taken off the air in the following way. I used to be the cult books expert on late night Radio 1 show, broadcast from Manchester. And when the disc jockey moved to the morning slot, I did my last cult book, which was the Bible. Why not? And between 11:30 and midnight, I did various responses to the Bible, one of which is in the Diaries of Evelyn Waugh. When Evelyn Waugh was an intelligence liaison officer in Yugoslavia during the Second World War, with Randolph Churchill, Winston Churchill's son. And Waugh had put out a rumour that Marshal Tito was a woman, and so Tito wouldn't speak to Waugh. So they were sitting there in this tent in the middle of Bosnia in a field, doing nothing, bored out of their heads in the pouring rain. And Churchill was bouncing around, driving them mad. And Waugh suggested to his friend Bob Laycock, who was with him, that, I know, we'll bet Randolph Churchill that he can't read the Bible from cover to cover, because my old nanny used to read only one book, which was the Bible. When she finished it, she started at the beginning. We'll bet him that he can't read it all the way through. And for 3 days, they had blissful peace and quiet, until he burst into their tent one night, slamming the Bible shut halfway through the second book of Kings with the more memorable phrase, Jesus Christ, God really is a shit, isn't he? At which point I saw Mark Radcliffe's face drain of blood. The producer behind the glass said he almost took the network off the air. His finger was on the sort of Armageddon button. When I said, that's been in the public domain since 1978, published by Longman's, page 327. But it was the idea, oh my God, there'll be a tsunami of complaints. Oh my God, this is the end of the world. Nobody complained at all. Several people wrote in, so that's really funny. And it is, but When the aforementioned Dennis McShane, when he was MP for Rotherham, he used the phrase to a group of Muslim constituents, well, if Muhammad won't go to the mountain, you can't say that, it's Islamophobic. And eventually you get to the point, and it happens with the Israel lobby, it's happened with the Muslims, where they behave like the child in the playground who comes over and thumps you just because you're looking at them. We talk about checking privilege. It is just a stupid, terrorising gambit. Treat it like that. Treat religion as politics, treat it as an opinion, and if they're offended, get over it. Simple as that.
Right. We've got time for one more
One
question.
more,
So
okay.
we'll take this.
I think being offensive can be very therapeutic, because I use it when I do counseling and I don't get anywhere, and I start being offensive, and that helps.
Yeah. Yeah. Rush of blood, get the adrenaline pumping the cholesterol out of the system. Yeah.
People start thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right. Well, that was a quick one, so we've got time for one more. One more question to the gentleman at the back.
I'm sometimes very offended by the fact that there's lots of good jokes about religious people, but very few good jokes about humanists and atheists.
That's because we're so boring, you know.
Well, I work for the Norwegian Humanist Union, and I'm also a columnist for Norway's biggest Christian newspaper, and my next column that I'll write for them is to challenge Christians to make jokes about us.
Yeah.
Because we need more jokes. It helps us grow in the church.
Well,
So my question to you, sir, is how would you go about mocking us here?
I did a cartoon for Index on Censorship once about a stand-up comedian who says, "Hey, evening, everyone. Any Catholics in tonight? Yep, well, bugger. Methodists? Yep. Jews? Yep." And he goes to every single religion. Yep. Wiccans? Yep. Pagans? Yep. Aztecs? Yep. Oh, fucking hell. Atheists? Any atheists in tonight? Right, there's these 3 queer fucking atheist bastards go into a pub. And that's it. I mean, we're so nice and lovely. How can you mock us? How can you love us?
Right, well, I think that's a perfect place to finish. Thank you so much, Martin.
And thank you very much for listening.